Tēnā koutou katoa. Okay, Markie here with, I think, day 5 of book reviews. So as per yesterday, giving you a view of where I am rather than a view of my ugly mug. I'm more of a podcaster than a vlogger. I kind of call them videos, but you don't really need to sit and watch them. They're mainly me talking. Sometimes I'll show something. Occasionally I get a whiteboard out, but usually that's fraught with disaster. So I'm on the beach again, as you, the more observant among you will have probably noticed. So book review. So I want to talk about a book called Brain Lock. I've lent my copy out, so I haven't been able to refer to it, and I'm doing this on an iPhone on the beach, as you can tell. So forgive me that I have forgotten the name of one of the co-writers, and I think everybody seems to do this. It's one of those books that has the main co-writer in big letters and the other one in very small letters, and Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz gets all the glory for this, but there is a co-writer, so when I get to doing the description box for this video, I shall make sure that the co-writer is forever emblazoned in glory and never forgotten, because it's a bit sad really, isn't it? I hope that was me. So this is a book about obsessive compulsive disorder, with a slightly different take on it to other approaches to the condition. Okay. And the reason this one is so important, it was helpful on a personal level, but I recommend this all the time on a professional level, because I work with a specific form of OCD called retroactive jealousy. So I'm not going to go into retroactive jealousy in this video, because obviously I'll cover that in other videos. But retroactive jealousy is a form of obsessive compulsive disorder, and there are many, including some ones that might surprise you. And this is a very different take on it. This book, the premise of this book is that, and the reason it's called Brain Lock, is that it kind of says that really OCD is not a psychiatric disorder. It's actually a physiological disorder. It's to do with the functioning of the brain. Now, he goes into a lot more detail, and if you want that, then get the book. But he talks about basically how the different parts of the forebrain, or the frontal lobes, that should work together. One part should communicate with another. Something goes wrong, which is why OCD is a kind of cyclical condition. So what do I mean by it being a cyclical condition? Well, often there is so there's two parts to obsessive compulsive disorder. There's the obsessions and the compulsions. People tend to kind of blur them and think that it's the same thing, but they're different. So an obsession is a thought, and a compulsion is an action. Okay, so if you look at how it works, there's a very definite kind of self-perpetuating cycle. So let's take a very common form of OCD, which is about kind of hygiene and contamination. Somebody, and let's just kind of forget about kind of current circumstances and viruses. Let's put that out of the picture, because let's put a different complexion on things at the moment. But imagine, this was 5 years ago, so somebody who has issues around contamination, so they might accidentally touch something that they would generally choose not to touch, like maybe the handrail on a public stairway. Okay. And so the obsession is the thought that there are germs on things, that they've by touching it they've been somehow contaminated, and they'll be experiencing a lot of unpleasant feelings, among them, and often foremost among them being anxiety. Okay. The compulsion then is to go and wash their hands, or use hand gel, or in extreme cases, people use things like bleach and that kind of thing, and actually physically, do themselves a bit of damage. Okay. Now, what happens is that whole kind of cycle. And I've done another video on this, so I'm not going to go into too much depth about that. But if the individual could sit out the anxiety around the obsession without indulging, and it's probably a harsher sounding word than I want it to sound, in the compulsion, then the whole illness would probably eventually burn itself out. Okay? Because it's it's the combination of an anxiety and an obsession about something, and then an action that reduces the anxiety, which then sets the individual up for the next incidence of the obsession and the compulsion. So when that person touches another stair rail or touches something else that they feel is contaminated, the whole thing kind of perpetuates and goes round and round again. Now, lots of people are very unsympathetic to people with OCD, and I think they're just silly. That is how people think about it, which is untrue and unfair. And if you live with somebody with OCD, then I think they need to be shown respect by virtue that it's not a silliness. It is very definitely an illness. That's not the same as necessarily colluding with it, which is a kind of a different thing. But what Dr. Jeffrey Schwartzer and his mysterious and anonymous sidekick talk about in the book is methods of breaking the cycle, which isn't just about not doing a compulsion, although that's a big part of it, but there are other parts to it as well. And what they're basically saying is that this changes the way that the brain works. Okay, so just because it's a physiological problem, as in a physical problem to do with the brain and how the brain operates, it doesn't mean that you need brain surgery to get well from it. But you can actually, by virtue of the fact that it works in a cycle, you can jam a spanner in the works. You can break the cycle in particular ways, and it shows you how to do that. So it's quite a short book. It's very readable. It's not an academic book. It's a book written for the public, written for sufferers of OCD. It's not a replacement for therapy where therapy is required. OCD is a much more serious condition than people think it is. I will say, I've said this in other videos, but I will say this again, that loads of people kind of jokingly say, oh, I'm a bit OCD about this and I'm a bit OCD about that. You are probably not. If it's not making your life a misery, it's not OCD. Okay. OCD can become so extreme that it's almost mirrors psychosis. It's not psychosis, and it's a very different thing. But it often reaches the point where it appears that person has lost touch with reality. They haven't. It's a different process, but it has that same extreme degree. So just because it's a neurosis and not a psychosis, never think of OCD as a mild condition. It's not. Okay. So everybody is a little bit obsessive and everybody is a little bit compulsive. That's part of human nature. Okay. So if you always have to stir your tea in a certain way, then yes, it's a little bit compulsive. But is that ruining your life or anybody else's life? Probably not. Okay. So next time you think, oh, I'm a bit OCD about this, I'm a bit OCD about that, just think actually OCD is a horrible condition which creates misery. I just thought I'd talk briefly about two forms of OCD that I have a particular interest in. One is retroactive jealousy, which is where people become obsessive about their partner's sexual or romantic history. That's one of the things that I work with. I'm one of only, I think, probably a maximum of 6 now, including the people that work with me, clinicians, qualified clinicians in the world that actually work with this condition. It's not been officially recognised by the psychiatric profession, but it's very, very real, and more people are recognising that it's a condition and getting help for it. So the compulsive part to it is that the sufferer will ask their partner questions or seek information, or will become obsessed with their sexual past, and though they don't really want to know about it, they'll kind of keep asking questions because they think they'll get relief from the answers to the questions. So they hear that their partner had a couple of one-night stands. They might have become aware of that, and they think that that's very distressing to them. But they think that the circumstances could be better or they could be worse in terms of how they judge that. So by asking questions, they might actually experience some relief, and that's often the case, and that's part of the cycle. And then usually after a while they ruminate further and come up with more questions, and the anxiety starts to build again, and they ask more questions, sometimes experience relief from the answers, and then sets up the next cycle, or sometimes experience the opposite, from the answers. So that's how it fits with obsessive compulsive cycles and patterns. And the other one, which I've done a video about, is these things are horrible conditions, is POCD. Now, POCD is a form of OCD which comes under the kind of subheading of intrusive thoughts. So intrusive thoughts can include a whole range of different things, but intrusive thoughts are always things that are horrific to the sufferer. Okay? So an intrusive thought is, we've all probably had mild ones, okay, without having this as a disorder. So have you ever been standing on a very high building and looking at people kind of, ant-sized down below, and just had a kind of wicked thought come into your head that, maybe I could throw something, see if it lands on someone's head, or maybe I could spit and see if it lands on someone's head. And you would never do that in a million years. You just would not do that. But that thought comes into your head. Or you're looking down over water and you have this compulsion to jump in, but it's not a strong compulsion, and you don't do it, and you never would. Okay. So that's the kind of closest kind of subclinical example of that kind of thing. So somebody with intrusive thoughts. So let's give an example, okay? So it's what we call ego dystonic. So what it means is it's always something that goes against the very kind of fabric of your being. It goes against something that you hold dear or believe in strongly. Okay. So a good example. Okay. So let's take somebody that's very religious. They belong to a faith group, like a church or a temple, and they hold things very seriously, and they attend, very vigorously. That's not the right word, is it? I was going to say religiously, which is probably the right word. What would happen there is the way they would experience intrusive thoughts is they might have an urge or a fear that they might shout out something blasphemous in the middle of the church service or the religious ceremony. But they never will. This is the thing with this condition, people never act on what it is that they're thinking of. So somebody that's very homophobic might have a fear that they'll start to kiss their same-sex colleagues, and they never do. So people never act on this stuff. So POCD is paedophile or paedophilic or pedophile if you're American, obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's intrusive thoughts about fearing that you're a paedophile. So again, there's no interest in no sexual interest in children. There's nothing behind this, but the person will start to feel anxiety around thinking, well, what if I'm a paedophile? What if I feel attracted to that little boy over there? And obviously, one of the reasons why this is such a horrific condition is that paedophiles and child sex offenders, and there are two different things. I've done a video on this. Obviously, there's an overlap. Not all child sex offenders are paedophiles, and not all paedophiles are child sex offenders. We'll check out my video on this. But both paedophiles and child sex offenders are, generally speaking, in modern society, the most scapegoated subgroup that there could be. Okay. And that hasn't always been the case. There have been times in history when homosexuals have fulfilled that role, or witches have fulfilled that role, perceived or real witches, if you go back far enough. But in modern society, they are pretty much, and I think it might change again. Who's the lowest, especially in kind of current circumstances. So I think it's possible that people that I'm not going to say these words out loud because there is actually censorship on social media at the moment, but people that are opposed to certain injections that people might have to prevent diseases, I would predict, if I was a gambling man, that they might actually take the place in future times as people that are vilified and seen as the lowest of the low. But at the moment, it's people who have a sexual attraction to children, or people who behave sexually towards children. And obviously, behaving sexually towards children is absolutely appalling. Does huge amounts of damage. And it is a horrific thing. I'm not saying that this kind of scapegoating is without a foundation, but it does have an extreme level to it, to the degree that people will seek to actively persecute people who have those behaviours or those inclinations. Okay, so what about if you have OCD? You have no paedophilic orientation whatsoever, but you think that you have on some level. What do? Can you get help? Can you talk to anyone? And there have been some horrific examples of people that have gone for help. There's one actual really good article about this guy who went to help from the mental health services in the NHS, and they completely took it the wrong way, and he ended up losing his job for a little while, losing contact with his family, because they responded to it as a risk situation, as a risk of harm to children, whereas it wasn't at all. It was a misdiagnosis. And this person, who was already in a pretty sort of hellish kind of situation already, went through something even worse. So that is called POCD. If so, anyone that's got an OCD, intrusive thought condition, they never act on things. So somebody that's got some form of psychosis where they hear voices telling them to do things, sometimes they act on those. Okay, so it's a very different thing. So this isn't for the lay person to try and judge which is which in these kind of cases, but for clinicians, for therapists, for mental health practitioners, it is our job to discriminate and to get an understanding of which that is, because the treatment is going to be completely different, and the risk issues and the management of the situation is going to be completely different. So just want to flag that it's a bandwagon, really, that I just want to make people aware of that, because people are suffering so much, so needlessly, really, when they're completely innocent. They are the safest people in the world in terms of they're not going to harm children in any way. So that is Brain Lock. And a little bit about OCD. It's a book I recommend to a lot of people. It's a book I think it's improved the quality of lives massively of countless people. Only one mini criticism of the book. I think it's really, the message of the book is quite a simple one, which is good. Simple is always good. And I think it's a bit padded out. I think they tried to make it a little bit thicker and a few more pages longer than it needs to be. So they've done that thing that often happens with these books of repetition, which is a little bit irritating. It's still a short book and quite an easy read, but yeah, I wish they hadn't done that, really. Maybe they should have put some pretty pictures in there. Thicker paper, something like that. I don't know, but I guess that would be the fault of the publishers, maybe the fault of society as a whole, and how we judge books. So if you know anyone that has OCD, buy them a copy of this book. It could change their lives forever. Rangimarie.